Real quick, if you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. Also, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at campfirecultpod for free. It'll really help us reach listeners just like you. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. And finally, if you don't mind, please share, rate, and review wherever possible. Welcome, dear listener, to the Campfire Cult Podcast. From a camper van deep in the haunted woods, I bring you first-hand accounts of chilling encounters with the paranormal. Step into the night and take a peek into the realm where reality and the supernatural collide. My name is Jazz, and I'll be your host. Welcome back, campers. In this episode, I'm not just your host, I'm one of the storytellers. For those that are new here, I wanted to retell the true accounts of my own encounters with the unknown, the ones that changed the way I look at the world. I've spoken of them before, but in the very early episodes of the show. I'll also be telling more stories from others that have come forward to share what they've seen, heard, and felt, from unseen things that stalk the woods, to voices that slip through the cracks of reality. Tonight, we open the door to what lies beyond. Settle in close to the fire and listen carefully, because these stories come from people like you and me. Let's begin. For my first story of the evening, I'm taking you to my family's cabin in Lake Tahoe, California. It was early summer, 2002. We were on a long weekend trip, my aunt, uncle, 2 cousins, and a foreign exchange student who was staying with them at the time. The Tahoe house, as we called it, is owned by my godparents. For years, it's been a haven for anyone in the family looking to escape the city and breathe in some pine-soaked mountain air. It was tradition, or maybe just habit, to kick off the day with breakfast at a little greasy spoon called Chris's Cafe. It's right off Highway 89 in Myers, just south of South Lake Tahoe. They served strong coffee, hearty mountain breakfasts, and enough fuel to launch you into whatever adventure the day had in store. That morning, we set our sights on one of our favorite hikes, a trail from Emerald Bay to Eagle Lake. It's a beautiful 3-mile out and back I'd done more times than I can count. We were especially excited to show the exchange student the crystal clear waters, not just of Lake Tahoe, but the alpine lakes tucked into the wilderness. Eagle Lake was our favorite. After a few hours of hiking, rock hopping, and soaking in the beauty, we were ready to head back for some food. But my uncle, always chasing the thrill, suggested we take the river route back. Off trail, rugged, and a little wild. We followed the river down, gripping tree roots to keep from sliding into the water. It was fun, sketchy in a few parts, and a memory maker for sure. By the time we got back to the cabin, around 2 p.m., I was wiped. I was a smoker back then, and all I wanted was a quick nap before our evening of board games and fireside lounging. The cabin has 3 bedrooms and a loft. The room I always stayed in was known as the Budweiser room. At one point, it had Budweiser branded sheets and curtains, a full commitment to the brand. No one really knows why, but I suspect the 70s had something to do with it. It was the coolest room in the cabin. Literally. No AC in the place, but that room stayed comfortable no matter what. Just a queen-size squeaky bed, a small side table, a closet, and a perfect little dent in the middle of the mattress. The kind of spot you just melt into. So I flopped down, face first into that dent, didn't even pull the covers back. I was tired, but I don't fall asleep quickly, so I just laid there, replaying the day in my head. That's when I felt something brush across my feet. Then it moved to the left side of the bed. I figured it was one of the 2 big dogs in the house. They followed me around constantly. I buy love with constant treats. About 30 seconds later, I felt the weight of something climb onto the bed. It started at my feet, moved slowly up toward the pillows, and settled down next to me. Not touching me, but definitely there. I figured it was my cousin Janelle. She was about 12 at the time. We never really napped together, but we'd fallen asleep on the couch during movies before, so it didn't feel all that weird. A minute later, I felt Janelle shift again, back across my feet, over to the right side of the bed, and settle in next to me. I didn't want to open my eyes. I was close to sleep and didn't want to ruin it, so I just stayed still. But then, a few minutes later, I felt the weight lift. Whatever it was moved back down toward my feet, then off the bed entirely. I was finally drifting off when it happened. 2 hands, cold and light, gripped my ankles, thinking Janelle was messing with me. I counted to 3 in my head, then leapt up with a loud roar to try and scare her. But the room was empty. No one under the bed, no one in the closet, no one behind the curtains. The door had been shut the entire time. I opened the door and found the whole family by the fire, laughing, talking, completely unaware of what had just happened. I shut the door and sat on the edge of the bed trying to make sense of it. Later at dinner, I told everyone what happened. And it turns out I'm not the only one that has had something happen to them in there. That room creeps everyone out. Which, now that I think about it, probably explains why no one ever fights me for it. The cabin wasn't built on any burial ground as far as we know. No deaths on record. But my family does have a habit of buying antiques and dragging home who knows what from estate sales. So maybe, just maybe, something came attached, and now it calls the Budweiser room home. I still stay in that room, hoping for another encounter, but I haven't been that lucky, not since that day. Whatever it was, it didn't feel evil, just lonely, like it wanted to be near someone, for a little while. And honestly, it wasn't the first time something strange happened while I was lying in bed. Back in high school, I used to feel my bed shake right as I was falling asleep. It would jolt me wide awake, and even once I sat up, the bed kept shaking until I got out of it. Even wilder, I used to hear my name whispered in my ear during that in-between state, just as I was drifting off. It happened so often I started to dread going to sleep. But this was different. This time, whatever it was, it came to lie beside me. Next, I have a surreal experience with what I believe to have been my grandmother. My grandmother on my mom's side and I were always close, inseparable really. We even shared a birthday. There was this little running joke in my family that she was obsessed with me. In her bedroom, she had an entire wall, covered floor to ceiling, in photos of me throughout my life up until then. It was affectionately called the Shrine. In 2002, she died. After spending a few difficult days just outside of Sacramento, where she'd been hospitalized, my uncle and I decided to head back home to San Francisco. We needed a night in our own beds, a change of clothes, before heading back to be with her again. That night, I was lying on my back in bed, my left arm hanging slightly over the edge. I was thinking about her and I could even smell her perfume on my clothes from hugging her earlier in the day. Sleep started to creep in, but just as I was beginning to drift off, I felt something. A tingle on my forearm, then a grab. Not gentle, not subtle, it was firm, urgent, like someone catching me from falling. I shot out of bed, ran straight out of my room, and burst into my uncle's room across the hall. He was sound asleep, snoring. I didn't wake him, but there was no chance I was going back to sleep in that room. It wasn't until later, after the adrenaline had faded, that it occurred to me. Maybe it was her. You see, my grandmother was a type 1 diabetic. In her later years, she lost most of her vision. She wore thick glasses, the kind people call Coke bottles, just to see a little. When she wanted to get your attention, she wouldn't reach for your hand. She'd grab your forearm every time. It was more reliable. And that night, that's exactly what it felt like. Then I remembered the smell, her perfume. That familiar scent filled the room for just a moment. And then it was gone. The next day, she passed. Every now and then, I still catch that same scent, her perfume, out of nowhere. It fades as quickly as it comes, but it always leaves an impact. Now, I don't know what happens after this life, but I like to think she checks in on me now and then, just to let me know she's still here. For my final personal story, we're headed back to 1996, high school graduation weekend. I grew up on the outskirts of Los Angeles, California, but went to high school in a small town just outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I graduated in 1996, pre-cell phones, and upon graduation, a group of friends and I decided to escape for a weekend of camping at a retired quarry surrounded by a tick-filled forest. This area was a very popular camping destination for locals, and we planned on a weekend filled with fishing, hiking, and the kind of carefree living that only comes with youth. As typical teenagers, we engaged in the usual activities, a bit of drinking, smoking weed, and simply just enjoying being around a campfire in the woods. I've always enjoyed taking nighttime walks, so around midnight, I managed to convince everyone to join me for a hike along the river trail. Armed with only a single small orange flashlight to guide us, we headed out. The area was relatively flat, with a well-maintained trail running alongside the tea-tinted Fox River. It was a clear night, swarming with mosquitoes, with a moonless sky. The only sounds accompanying us on our journey were the gurgles of the river to our left, the forest to our right, and our mellow, slightly stoned conversations. Early into the hike, we decided it would be more fun to let our eyes adjust to the darkness and save the flashlight for when it was absolutely necessary. If you've ever spent time in the woods without any artificial light, you'll know that once your eyes adapt, you can perceive a surprising amount of detail in the dark. The absence of a flashlight or headlamp also allowed the forest to come alive, undisturbed by artificial illumination. As we gathered by the river to roll a quick joint, trying to do our business under the faint orange glow of the flashlight, we suddenly started hearing splashing in the water. It wasn't just a gentle splash, it sounded as if enormous boulders were dropped into the river from a great height. One of my friends suggested it might be a deer running through the river, but these splashes were far too large. What I imagined a 500-pound man belly flopping into a pool sounded like. Prey animals usually move with more stealth, and even if they intended to make noise, they couldn't create such thunderous splashes unless they were cannonballing into the river themselves. We ruled out falling rocks since the shoreline was level and devoid of any vantage points for rocks to tumble from. If it were a bear, it would have silently stalked us rather than making commotion to frighten us. Its prey. Although it held our attention at the time, reason and logic prevented us from fleeing in fear, so we focused on the mission at hand of rolling that joint. It was a challenging endeavor in the dark, especially with the low-grade Mexican ditchweed we had, which was from a rock-hard brick of stems and seeds we acquired earlier that day. Today's teens have no idea how lucky they are. Nevertheless, we continued our journey along the river, smoking, and casually speculating about the origins of the mysterious splashes. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there was an incredibly bright flash of light. It illuminated our surroundings for around 5 seconds before vanishing in a blink. One of my friends, the true believer in our group at the time, berated himself for not checking the time beforehand to see if we had lost any time. Several things stood out to us. The sky was devoid of clouds, no helicopters or airplanes, and drones, to our knowledge, hadn't yet been invented. Now, you might be thinking, well, you were all high. How can you be sure of what you saw? I would understand that skepticism if we hadn't all experienced the phenomenon. In the aftermath, I took a deep dive into the various types of lightning, ball, heat, and even the popular government excuse of swamp gas. None of these explanations truly accounted for what we had witnessed. I had no idea what it could have been, but part of me wanted to believe that the splashes in the river and the flash of light were somehow connected. What struck me as particularly strange was that, despite walking in the dark with our eyes fully adjusted to the absence of light, when the flash occurred, none of us experienced the usual reflex of squinting our eyes in pain, as if someone had suddenly switched on a bright light while we were asleep. It was quite the opposite, actually. In fact, most of us distinctly remember being able to see everything, every little detail. The environment around us imprinted itself upon our collective memory. To this day, except for high-definition photographs, I have never seen the intricate details of leaves, tree bark, and the tall grasses surrounding us as clearly as I did during that ephemeral explosion of light. I'm not sure what it all could have been, but after years of exploration into the paranormal, could it have been a Bigfoot throwing rocks into the river to deter us from coming that way? Maybe. The bright light? No idea what that could have been. A portal opening up, maybe. To this day, I still think about what we all saw that night, but I guess I'll never know. Now, on to more of your encounters. First up, a summer koi pond gig turns terrifying when something inhuman emerges from the woods, silent, precise, and far too intelligent.
I'm a college student majoring in wildlife biology, and during the summers, I watch over my neighbor's koi fish pond while he's out of the country visiting family in Vietnam. He's this older, kind of eccentric rich guy who doesn't trust just anyone with his house. But I've been doing this for like 4 years now, so we've got a good rhythm. My job is dead simple. I feed the koi, water a few plants, clean out debris from the pond filter, and make sure nothing's dying or leaking. He pays me $10 a week, which is laughably low, but honestly, I'd probably do it for free. The pond is beautiful. The koi are these massive, colorful, living jewels, and it's peaceful out there. Pine trees shade the whole area, and his backyard backs up into a little wooded patch, so it feels kind of secluded. Anyway, here's what happened. About halfway through the summer, one of the koi went missing. Just gone. These fish are like 2 to 3 feet long and feisty as hell. I figured maybe it was hiding under a rock or something, but after checking the whole pond and waiting around a bit, I had to accept it was gone. I called my neighbor to let him know, feeling guilty even though I had no idea how a koi fish just vanishes. He wasn't mad at all, just said something like, "It happens sometimes, probably a bird." "Not your fault, I'll buy a new one when I get back." That should have been that. Next day, another one's gone. This time there's a little trail of blood on the stone ledge and some half-chewed fish bits left behind. That's when I got concerned. I know this area and the animals around here. There aren't any hawks or large birds that could swoop in. The trees above the pond are too dense. Neighborhood cats are lazy and pampered, and these koi are huge. You'd need serious strength to haul one out. So I called him again and suggested we set up a camera, and he actually Amazon Primed one to the house. I installed it myself the next day, positioned to cover the whole pond and a good chunk of the woods behind it. A few days pass. No more missing fish. Then, maybe 4 or 5 days in, another one vanishes. This time the pond looked like a crime scene. Bones, blood, and what I think was part of the skull. It didn't look like a raccoon or a possum attack either. This was too clean. Almost like surgical tearing. I waited until my neighbor could check the footage with me. He's got the camera synced to his phone, so we just called and went through it together. Most of it was normal. Me feeding the fish, some deer walking by, the usual rabbit or squirrel hopping past. Then night hits. At around 3:40 a.m., something walks into frame. And when I say walks, I don't mean on 2 feet. I mean it moved, but not like a person. Not like anything I've seen in real life. It was tall, had to be over 6 feet. Slender, but not in that exaggerated slender man way people make up. It had a round, bald head, no ears or hair that I could see. Its skin looked grayish in the night vision, and it was hunched. Not like an old man, more like how a frog sits, bent back legs, arms hanging long enough that the fingers touched the ground. Those fingers, by the way, easily a foot long each. It walked toward the pond slowly, not even looking around, just directly for the water. Then it crouched, if you can call it that, and just stood there. Still. Unmoving. Like a statue. And then, fast as lightning, it snapped one of the koi out of the water with both hands. No effort, no splash, just grab. The fish wriggled and twisted, but the thing held it like it weighed nothing. It laid the koi down on the stone ledge and used its fingers, those long, gross fingers, to peel the skin off like someone tearing wrapping paper. It didn't even eat with its hands. It ducked its head down and took little bites straight from the fish's exposed muscle and bones. I can't explain the way it moved. It didn't feel like an animal eating. It felt like studying. Then, all of a sudden, it stopped. Its head snapped up and turned to the tree line behind the pond. From the darkness, 2 little yellow dots blinked into view. The neighbor's cat. One of those dumb little fluffy ones that always sleeps in the sun and chases butterflies. I recognized it immediately. The two just stared at each other, the thing and the cat, for a solid 5 seconds. Then it moved. Fast. It dropped onto all fours, more like a gorilla than a dog, and scrambled toward the cat using those massive arms and bent legs. It didn't make a sound. No growl, no roar, just silent, furious movement. The cat bolted. They both exited the frame, and that was it. No more fish ever went missing. Not one. When the video ended, my neighbor was dead quiet for a few seconds. Then he muttered something in Vietnamese and added, "If I see it again, I shoot." Like, that's it? I thought he'd be terrified or want to call someone, but it was like he already knew something weird could happen out here and just didn't care. I don't feed the fish at night anymore or even go back there after sunset. I love animals and cryptid stories, and I used to want something weird to happen to me. But not like this. This was different. It didn't feel like an animal, but it felt very real.
Next, three friends take a summer trip to a remote Belarusian village, only to encounter glowing eyes, ghostly voices, and something lurking in the dark.
This happened about 17 years ago during summer break. My friend and I went to visit another friend who was staying in this tiny, remote village in Belarus for the summer. The house belonged to his grandparents, and the whole place felt super isolated. Honestly, it was actually a lot of fun at first. We went swimming at a nearby lake every day, and at night we'd stay up late just sitting by the water, listening to the kind of deafening silence you only get in the countryside, and talking for hours. During the day, we'd go mushroom picking, explore the area, take pictures, and just make some really good memories together. We stayed for a few weeks, but then one of my friends had to leave early because of some family stuff. The only way out was a bus that came twice a week, and she missed it. So she came back to our friend's place and asked if we could walk her to a nearby highway to try to hitch a ride. The main road was about 7 miles away, so we started walking. When we got there, it was midweek and no cars passed at all. Guess most people were still at work in the city. As it got later, we decided to just walk back. On the way back, we passed through a few neighboring villages that were half abandoned. Honestly, it was pretty creepy, but we kept ourselves entertained by singing and joking around to keep the fear at bay. It was getting dark, and we still had about 4 miles left. Then, we ended up on this road with dense forest on both sides. Suddenly, we started hearing noises coming from the trees. It was pitch dark and, honestly, pretty unsettling. We tried to joke about it, but deep down, we all felt something was off. Then my friend pointed, and we saw 2 huge yellow eyes staring at us from the trees. We just kept walking in silence for a bit until one of us nervously said, "Must be some wild fireflies messing with us." We laughed, but we all knew those definitely weren't fireflies. Keep in mind, this was before cell phones, so there was no way to call anyone. We just had to keep moving and get back safely. As we got closer to the village, 2 of us heard a female voice coming from the forest. We looked at each other, both realizing we heard it while the third friend was talking and didn't notice. I got goosebumps. It sounded so real, and the fact that I wasn't the only one who heard it made it even creepier. We didn't say anything until we got back to the house. Here's where it gets even weirder. In Slavic folklore, there's not just the Leshy, the forest spirit who protects the woods and sometimes plays tricks on people, but also the Rusalka. Rusalki are these mythological female spirits often connected to lakes and rivers. They're usually described as beautiful women with long hair, sometimes said to lure people, especially at night, with their singing or voices. We'd been hanging out at the lake so many nights, and then to hear a mysterious female voice coming from the trees later on. It definitely made us wonder if we'd gotten a little too close to something supernatural. We still joke about those unhinged fireflies, but deep down, we all know we saw and heard something we can't explain. Between the abandoned houses, the glowing eyes in the forest, and that eerie female voice, it was honestly one of the scariest and strangest experiences of my life. And yeah, I still think about those nights at the lake and wonder what might have been watching or listening to us from the darkness.
Coming up, a glowing orb drifts through a quiet backyard, harmless at first, but will it stay that way?
Back around 2004, I was living with my parents in a wooded area of Ontario, Canada. Our backyard had a few fruit trees, and beyond that, the forest stretched deep and dark. One night, my dad was heading upstairs to bed when he happened to glance out the window overlooking the yard. That's when he saw it, this strange blue-white light drifting among the fruit trees. It wasn't super bright, but it wasn't dim either. Just hovering there, maybe 3 feet off the ground, gliding slowly and silently. At first, he thought it was someone sneaking around with a flashlight. He braced himself, ready to confront whoever it was. But the more he looked, the more he realized. This wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't attached to anything. It was just a ball of light, floating through the trees. He called for us to come take a look. My mom and I joined him at the window, and we all just stood there, staring, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. Eventually, Dad decided he needed to get a closer look. But the second he cracked open the door, the light reacted, it pulled away, gliding silently into the deeper woods beyond our yard. Creeped out, Mom and I went back upstairs and tried to sleep, though we couldn't stop thinking about it. Dad stayed by the window, watching. He said the light came back. He watched it drift among the trees for a while, then slowly vanish into the forest again. The next morning, I was jolted awake by my dad shouting in a panic. He couldn't see. He had gone blind overnight. We rushed him to the hospital, terrified. After some tests, the doctor told us it looked like he'd suffered retinal burns, something he usually only saw in people who had been welding without proper protection. But my dad wasn't a welder. He worked in an office. He hadn't done anything like that. Thankfully, his vision returned after a couple of days. But the cause? We never figured that out. We never saw the light again. I eventually lost touch with that part of my life, but I've never forgotten what happened. Neither has my mom. And to this day, we still don't know what that light was, or what it did to my father.
Coming up next, alone in a dark Irish forest, a girl senses she's being followed, and the real fear begins when the stranger refuses to leave.
Back when I was 14 years old, my family moved to the Republic of Ireland, where we lived for another 6 years. We had first moved to the northwest of the country, but after a year there, we relocated to the Irish Midlands because my dad got a new job in Dublin. My parents bought a cottage on the outskirts of a very small village, just a stopping point between two larger towns. The village was so small and remote, there was basically nothing to do. Not long after we moved, I started exploring the surrounding area with my border collie, Maisie. Eventually, I found a large stretch of bogland containing a man-made forest. Every weekend or school break, I'd walk that area with Maisie, following along a railway line used for transporting peat. After months of trekking the same bogland, I eventually stopped going. I can't quite recall the reason why. Maybe because I always felt like I was trespassing, though I wasn't. Or maybe because the ground was so uneven I'd come home with horrible blisters. Although I stopped going to that bogland, there was a public forest outside a nearby town where I went to school. Since it was a 20-minute drive away, my dad would take me and Maisie there, drop us off, and pick us up 2 or 3 hours later. What I loved about those woods was how quiet they were. Only the occasional family, jogger, or dog walker ever passed by. One evening, I went back to the woods with Maisie. My dad dropped us off and planned to pick us up after running errands. As we made our way along the trail, the light was already starting to dim. Wanting to reach the car park before it got too dark, I decided to take a shortcut through the forest, using one of the many narrow side trails. Following one of those trails, Maisie and I stumbled upon a small tippy-shaped hut made from logs. I used to play hide-and-seek with Maisie there. I'd hide inside the hut while she circled it, confused and looking for me. Whether I played that game with her that day, I'm not sure. But I do remember walking down that same side trail and turning to look behind me. Down the entryway, I saw a man, about 20 meters back, who had just turned onto the same trail. For some reason, I had a strange, immediate feeling about him. I can't remember exactly how he walked, but it struck me as off, suspicious somehow. Listening to my instincts, or maybe just my paranoia, I quickly put Maisie back on her lead and hurried down the trail. A few minutes later, I reached the main trail again, but the evening had gotten darker. Looking back, I saw the man again, still behind me and now only 10 meters away. I told myself I was probably overthinking it, that he wasn't actually following me. But something still felt wrong. I pulled out my phone to call my dad, hoping he was already waiting in the car park. No answer. I figured he was still driving and hoped he was nearly there. By the time I reached the car park, it was basically pitch black. There was just one single car, and it wasn't my dad's. I sat on a picnic bench and waited, hoping he'd arrive soon, and that the strange man wasn't actually following me. A minute or two later, I heard footsteps. The man was approaching through the darkness. Trying not to panic, I stared at my phone, trying to look busy, or at least unapproachable. Thankfully, the man walked right past me. He got into the only car in the car park. But he didn't drive off. He just sat there, engine running, headlights on. 20 minutes passed, still no sign of my dad, and the man was still there, I tried calling and texting my dad again, but got no answer. I sat there in the dark, the hum of that stranger's engine filling the silence. Maisie, usually a nervous dog, began whining nonstop at my feet. She started digging at the dirt beneath the bench, scratching out a surprisingly deep hole. Maybe she felt something was wrong too. Finally, after what felt like much longer than 20 minutes, the man put his car in reverse. He pulled out of the parking space and drove away, leaving me and Maisie in peace. Even though we were now alone, stranded outside a dark forest, I felt a huge wave of relief. 10 minutes later, my dad finally arrived. His excuse for being so late? He forgot he had to pick us up. I still don't know if that man really was following me. And I definitely don't know why he just sat in that car for so long. But I did learn 2 things that night. 1, my dad can be a careless douche. And 2, never hike through the forest alone, especially that late in the evening.
I felt something like that before, but never like that. Maybe it's because I'm a man. There's a kind of shield in that, I guess. But the women I know, they say it's a constant hum in the background of their day. Sometimes they cross the street. Sometimes they duck into a store. Sometimes they turn around and walk the long way home, just to keep space between them and a stranger who might be something more, something worse. But what happens when you're alone, miles from anywhere, on a quiet trail deep in the forest? The only other soul around is the one walking just a little too close behind you. What do you do when the exit is miles away and the danger hasn't spoken, but it's watching? Could be benign, but could also be danger. Let me know what you'd do in the comments. Real quick, some of you may know, but most probably don't. I launched my own coffee brand called Outlands Coffee. Not only do I run it, but I'm also the one roasting every single batch. If you love damn good coffee and want to support a fiercely independent small business while also supporting this podcast, head on over to outlandscoffee.com and give us a shot. We roast to order single origin perfection alongside a couple of bold, adventurous blends. Crafted for those who take coffee as seriously as they do their campfire stories. Here in Washington, we don't just believe in Bigfoot, we believe in a great cup of coffee too. Try it out for yourself. Use code CAMPFIRE for $5 off your first order. Now, back to the show. Next, a seasoned hunter follows the sound of a child's cry deep into Oklahoma woods.
I've hunted turkeys for years, mostly in Oklahoma, in spots local to me. I'm an Okie born and raised. Anyway, this happened a while back when I was a young man, right at the start of turkey season, in a spot I had just gotten permission to hunt. I pulled up way before daylight, parked off a dirt road, and walked into the woods. If you know turkey hunting, it's a game of patience. Get set up, get quiet, start calling, and wait. I set my decoys out in a little clearing and tucked myself back against a big old oak tree. Morning mist was clinging to everything, real thick that day. Kinda eerie and a little out of the ordinary for that place. Once it was time, I did a few soft yelps on my call, just trying to coax a long beard in. Not 5 minutes later, I heard a distant gobble. Adrenaline kicked in. Then right after that, I heard something else, crying, like human crying. Faint, but enough to stop me dead. At first, I thought it had to be a weird bird I'd never heard before. Or maybe a coyote making a racket. I've heard coyotes make some freaky noises when they get riled up. So I shook it off and kept hunting. But then it came again, clearer this time. It wasn't an animal, it was human. Sounded like a baby or a real small kid crying somewhere behind me in the trees. At that point, I was concerned. I figured maybe someone's kid had wandered off from one of the homes nearby or something. You never know. It did sort of scare me, but I was more worried that a kid was out there in the woods alone. I've got nieces, nephews, and younger cousins, so it stirred something in me. I grabbed my gun and started picking my way through the brush, following the sound. I had to fight my way through a briar patch and some cedars, which isn't ever fun. But I was definitely hearing crying. Eventually, I came to this old oak tree. It was twisted all up, old as hell. Looked like it had been struck by lightning at some point. There was a hollow near the base, big enough to crawl into if you wanted. The crying sounded like it was coming from inside that hollow. I just stood there, heart pounding, trying to see anything in the dark hole. I was honestly trying to work up the courage to look inside. But before I could even take a step closer, The crying stopped. Like someone had flipped a switch, it was all of a sudden silent. So I backed up real slow and didn't turn my back until I had some distance between me and that tree. I thought about calling my dad, but the whole thing left me feeling crazy. I felt like maybe I imagined it, but I know what I heard. I grabbed my gear and hiked out fast, didn't even hunt the rest of the day. A month or two later, I was talking to a buddy of mine at his house. We were getting ready to go fishing, and his uncle was out there, holding cord around the tailgate of his truck. We got to talking, and I told them about what happened. His uncle got real quiet, and he's full-blood Seminole. Now, I don't know how familiar you folks are with Oklahoma history, but the Seminoles were one of the tribes sent here in the 1800s. And I had been hunting land that would have been theirs, land they would have once settled. Anyway, his uncle explained quietly, almost reverently, that the Seminole people traditionally buried stillborn babies in the hollows of trees. They believed the trees protected the tiny souls until they could pass on peacefully. I still get chills thinking about it. I don't think what I heard was trying to scare me. I think it just was, like an old sadness still hanging around. When I'm in the woods, I still think of that tree sometimes, and the tiny voice held gently within. It reminds me that even places we believe we know intimately can hold mysteries beyond our understanding, and that not every unexplained sound in the wild is meant to harm us. I've thought about it a lot, and the best I can come up with is this: some things are simply meant to be remembered, respected, and left in peace. Anyone else ever heard anything similar?
We hear a lot of stories on this show. Growls in the dark, footsteps behind the tent, something tall moving through the trees. But this is something else. This one isn't about being hunted. It's not about fear, exactly. It's about reverence, about standing in the presence of something ancient and heartbreakingly human. The woods hold more than wildlife. They hold memory, grief, echoes that outlast generations. A baby's cry from the hollow of a twisted oak. Man, I don't care how tough you are, that's gonna rattle your soul. And to learn the history behind it, how the Seminole people gave their tiniest, most fragile souls to the trees for protection, that's not just folklore, that's a sacred truth. This isn't just a hunting story. This is a haunting reminder that we walk through places carrying stories we don't always see until they call out to us. And maybe, just maybe, if you're quiet enough, you'll hear them too. For our final story of the evening, we're headed to the deep woods of northern Wisconsin, where something watches from the tree line.
On the last day of my camp retreat in northern Wisconsin in Taylor County, my friend and I were walking up to our cabin to grab our sweatshirts because it was chilly. Our cabin was in the middle of two others, right next to the woods. It's a public campsite, and people come and go as they please. The woods behind us stretch for miles, and as far as anyone knows, nobody lives out there. We made our way up the hill while the rest of the campers and staff were walking back from night games. When we reached the top, we pulled out our flashlights to find our cabin in the dark. As I reached for the handle of the door, my friend suddenly said, "Hey, that looks like a guy." He was pointing toward the woods. I turned to look, and sure enough, there was something that looked like a person. We laughed at first, thinking it was just part of a tree. But then we noticed it wasn't a tree. It was a humanoid figure. It stood unusually tall, maybe 6 or 7 feet. Its arms were long and human-like. Its body was a dull gray, and its neck, stark white. We looked at each other in disbelief. Slowly, we began to back up, our flashlights locked on the figure. Then it raised its arm and stepped toward us. We didn't wait to see anything else. We bolted down the hill. Later that night, staff patrolled the grounds to make sure nothing else happened. One of them stopped by our cabin while I was trying to calm my friend down. He told us he'd seen movement near the cabins, but he couldn't tell what it was. That night still haunts me. Before the retreat even started, my brother had noticed something peeking through the main cabin window. But before he could get a good look, it backed away into the darkness. He only saw its eyes, and they were not human. His close friend later told us he heard something mimicking bullfrogs while he was in the porta potty. But when the thing actually showed up, the frogs and birds went completely silent. On the very first day of camp, my brother and I both heard a loud, dog-like growl. But there were no dogs, and no person could make a sound like that. But honestly, I still wonder what that thing was.
That's all for tonight, dear listeners, unless you are a Patreon cult member, where I have an extra 30 minutes of stories in store for you. And please remember, if you want to support this podcast and love a damn good cup of coffee, head on over to outlandscoffee.com and use code CAMPFIRE for $5 off your first order and give us a try. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. Until next time, I'll be leaving you in the dark where whispers linger and shadows dance. Stay wary, sleep well, and beware the whispers in the night. If you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. You can follow us anywhere on social media at campfirecultpod and online at campfirecultpod.com. And finally, if you don't mind, please rate and review wherever possible.